what does it mean for me to be a historian out in the wild? What does it mean to be a historian in the fashion industry? And what are basically the outlets of fashion history in society, in the real world? There are many lessons to be learned about fashioning our own identity, about living in accordance to our values, about dreaming and creating really different ways to produce and sell and consume and engage with fashion. They can shape macroeconomics, public policy, the big things in society. But I think they can also shape our very own, very personal, very micro experiences of life.
Have you ever imagined fashion being as diverse as human culture? Have you ever dreamed of a respectful, ethical, and socially just fashion industry? Have you ever envisioned sustainability being at the core of the entire fashion system? This is your host, Laura Beltrán-Rubio. I'm a fashion curator, researcher, and educator. My mission is to translate scholarly insights into actionable strategies that we can all take to reshape how we create, wear, and think about fashion. So find a comfortable seat, brew some tea, and open your notebook as you join me in the quest for redressing fashion.
Hello, my dear fashion friends. Welcome to a new episode of Redressing Fashion. And this is a bit of a celebration episode because there are a lot of things actually that I think merit attention and, of course, celebration today. So this is the second to last episode of the year after finally managing to stick to the schedule of second and fourth Thursday of the month, except last month I published them a little early because of the holiday week in the US. But yeah, that I think is a great achievement for me. And then the other great achievement is that this is the 10th episode of the podcast. And I've heard, or actually a good friend of mine told me, and he's an expert on social media and marketing and podcasting, so that's why I trust him on this matter. He told me that very few podcasts actually survive it this far. So I think that's also worth a huge celebration, and especially because it has not been easy to get here. It's been, like 2 years, I think now, since I finally decided that I was going to start this podcast. And it's only been 10 episodes in 2 years. So that's proof of how hard it has been. At the same time, I moved across an entire ocean unexpectedly. I also unexpectedly exited academia. And I think that this season really has been one of the craziest, busiest, but also most rewarding times of my life. So I think that is worth celebrating too. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you haven't listened to all the 9 or any of the 9 previous episodes before today, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a listen. Also, if you can, follow, comment on wherever it is that you're listening or watching to this podcast. That would really make a difference for me. It helps me have a bit of social proof for when I invite new people, and that's definitely something that I want to keep doing here. And it also helps me growth, especially as this public facing sort of scholarship is my new full-time job, although it doesn't quite pay as a full-time job yet, but we're getting there. And then there's another thing that I want to celebrate today, and that's a more personal celebration, but I know that I have mentioned it, written about it in my newsletter, in social media. I don't think I have necessarily mentioned it here at the podcast, but I wanted to update everyone on my visa situation in the UK And the news is that I finally received my visa this week. So everything is sorted for now. I can stay here, I can work here, I can keep doing what I do. And that really is a huge relief. But it also, I think, merits some celebration because that means that I can now start formally envisioning the next year, the next few months of podcasting, of my intellectual production, of my public scholarship. So thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who has been following the process, who has sent good thoughts, who has messaged me, who has checked in. And of course, massive thanks to the people who actually helped me get the visa, who advised me on the process, who wrote letters of recommendation for me, who just helped me stay somewhat sane through all of the stress. I really can't thank you enough. With all of that being said, I think we are ready to delve into the topic of today. And so this is an unscripted episode, like you know I like. I did bring some notes for what I want to discuss today. So I think this episode is really framed by the end of year kind of reflections that I certainly do and that I know a lot of people do around this time. More recently, I've been trying to think about yearly goals and like a yearly vision in the spring, which is also my birthday. So that's when I do my major goal setting for the year. But I think it's inevitable to use the winter as a moment to take a step back, look inward, and reflect. And this winter specifically, this year, this last couple months, have also offered a really important moment of introspection for me because of the life changes that I'm going through. And so I know I just mentioned that public facing scholarship is my new full time thing, but I would like to take a minute to tell the story of how that happened. I know I promised it months ago. I think I'm finally ready to share some of it. So I'll tell you that story, and then the rest of the podcast, I really want to use it to maybe reflect about what is the point of fashion history and how to really just like use history to build a better future in fashion, of course, but I think this also applies to other areas of human existence and human culture. And I want to share a bit of the vision that I've been kind of harvesting. It is very much a bunch of loose thoughts, as I like to call them right now. But I am hoping that looking at history in this more practical way can be useful, not just for me as I build the next step of my career, but to other people. And one of the things that excites me the most about it is that I've actually already started to be invited to speak about this to postgraduate students and students in different parts of the world. So, that's fun. But we'll get there in a minute. First, let's take a step back and let me share with you the story of how it is that I got here. So, some of you might remember maybe from the very early podcast episodes, and especially I think if you follow me on social media or if you read my newsletter, that's where I've shared most of that side of my life. I moved to the UK almost 2 years ago. It's unbelievable how fast time has passed to take a full-time job as lecturer in design cultures at De Montfort University. Before that, I had taken about 6 months to rest and recover after finishing my PhD, while I also held a full-time tenure track academic position at Universidad de los Andes in Bogota. So basically, I was having like two full-time jobs because getting a PhD is a full-time thing for sure. And then I was also being a full-time academic. Back then, I swore when I quit my job and finished the PhD more or less at the same time that I wasn't going to go again into academia. I envisioned a life as a consultant working with brands mostly and designers in developing design concepts. Because what I know what to do best is researching and writing and telling stories about fashion. And so that I think is something that a lot of brands and a lot of designers do. Many of them don't have a lot of time to do that because there are a bunch of more practical aspects that need to be taken care of before the research. And so part of the issue there is that because they don't have time to engage in slow, profound, meaningful research that goes beyond, the surface and whatever it is that whatever search engine you use gives you in 5-10 seconds. That's what leads to misrepresentation, to cultural appropriation, to racism even, and to just a bunch of malpractices in the industry. And so back then my dream was to help solve these problems at the industry level by offering my services, by offering my support, really, in doing the research, which is what I know to do best, as I already said. And which, I mean, it's what I've been doing for the last, I don't know, 15 years of my life, maybe a little bit longer than that. It's funny because I thought that that dream had kind of died when I started my next academic position in, I don't know, like 4 months after I swore I would never be back in academia. And it didn't for several reasons. The first one, I think, is because in my job at DMU, it was beautiful because I actually got to teach design students again. And so I got to have these conversations with them. So, yes, I taught them history, but I always try to teach history with a sort of practical side to it, where they learn to engage with history, to design, and to design things that are significant. And then in the last year, actually, that I was there, I became part of the core team teaching fashion communication and styling. And I think that's where I finally saw how my life as a fashion scholar can really have impact in the fashion industry beyond just teaching that mandatory class that students have to take, that not a lot of them really like that much. And if they do, they're so busy with other things that they really don't have the energy or the brain width to really engage with research and history in a thorough way. The job at DMU had a bunch of highs and lows, like probably every job does. But I actually was very happy there. I really enjoyed my time there. I think I grew professionally in ways beyond imagined. Really, really, really enjoyed engaging with the students there. And I think personally, what I enjoyed the most was owning that sort of in betweenness that I know I navigate between academia and the fashion industry because I have good experience in both. I'm definitely much more a historian than I am a fashion journalist or a fashion communicator or a fashion consultant because I've spent more time in academia. But the time that I've spent in the fashion industry doing marketing, doing fashion buying, doing a bunch of other little things, doing research for concept creation, I think has given me a unique perspective that not a lot of other fashion historians have. Some do, perhaps many more than I am aware of. But I do think that a lot of fashion historians end up spending their lives doing research, writing books without a lot of contact with the industry. And no shade to them, absolutely nothing against them. I personally just don't think that's how I want to live my life. Yeah, that's that. I mean, that's the decision that I've made. And funnily enough, yesterday I was at the Fashion Minority Report end of year event, and two beautiful things happened. out of other many beautiful things, but these two are the ones that are relevant right now. First one, several people, and especially the young members of the mentee cohorts that were there, were excited about meeting a fashion historian, among other things, because it's rare. They said that they haven't really met others. So it was probably more of a unique thing, and that's why it was exciting. But then when I started talking with them and telling them more about what I can do and how I think history should inform design, they were very excited by the possibility, and they even started reflecting about their own practices as young emerging designers and what they do. So that was really nice. And then the other thing was in conversation with Maximilian Rayner, who was basically the guest of honor of the night. And he's also definitely a rising star in contemporary British fashion. Maximilian was very excited also about the idea of having a real researcher, not that designers are not real researchers or cannot be, but that's not the main thing that they're tasked with doing. But having a sort of historian or like researcher by trade support concept creation, Maximilian thought that that was genius. And I think that brought me back to that dream that I thought was long lost. And it made me reconnect with it, and now I'm tearing up. I don't know why. But I think the tears here are that I'm just very excited about what's to come, and at the same time, probably very scared because I don't know how it's going to take shape. And then there's this pull, or this sort of purpose that I've felt in my life since I was a kid to make a difference in the world, to shape a better society in a way that's more egalitarian, where justice primes, and which actually feels quite far away from where, not only where we are living, but also where we're headed with the current status of the world. Yeah, so I mean, it is a difficult moment. I didn't share why I left DMU. I did say that it was a fantastic chapter of my life. It really was. The end was a little rough because the university is going a major, major financial restructuring. It has to do with budget issues, like many other universities in the UK and probably around the world. There are financial struggles, and so that meant major reductions. I don't think it was handled in the best way, but that's my very own personal opinion. And so I ended up being laid off alongside many, many, many other staff members and lecturers and professors who have had their contracts basically terminated by the university in this major financial restructuring. And this time now, I was going to say for sure, but I know I am the kind of person who's always open to opportunities. So maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but at this very moment, I am not planning in returning to academia, at least not full time. I know that I will continue having a sort of foot in academia for several reasons. I have an academic book coming out, and I need to finish writing the full manuscript and submit it to my editor within the next month or so. So there's that. I have already been invited and have several guest lectures scheduled for the spring semester in Glasgow, in New York, in Bogota, in London, and there are some others still in the works. So, I will be, and I'm very excited to be still occupying academic spaces and being able to teach some of what I've researched, some things that I know with students around the world. And it would actually be a dream to be able to, travel more and engage with more students in more parts of the world. And then also, I think I am a researcher by heart. And that, of course, means it's very exciting to be able to bring this research to the industry side of things. But then I also like writing and publishing. And so I'm pretty sure that even though I'm not planning on having a full-time academic job at this very moment, I can see myself still submitting to journals, still publishing, book chapters, things like that. I would like my next books to be less academic and more nonfiction like, but I still don't know what my next book project will be. So who knows? I mean, there are a lot of things that are still very much in progress these days. And so that leads me, and I lost my page, to history. That leads me back to history. Why? What does it mean for me to be a historian out in the wild, in the real world? What does it mean to be a historian in the fashion industry? And what are basically the outlets of fashion history in society, in, you know, the real world, so to speak? I think I'm definitely still trying to figure this out myself. I'm tearing up again. I am sorry. I was not expecting to get as emotional here as I am today. But I think what I'm seeing, what I'm sensing is a mix of excitement and fear. And I wonder if also my very own kind of academic judgment taking place here, and it's academic judgment that of course is self-imposed, but that it's also kind of projected or like adopted through the view of, or the eyes of, people around me who are people who love me, or at least some of them are, but I think who have, like many of us, a very set view of what people can do. And actually, I'm thinking about my mother. If you've heard me or read me, you know that I have a very close relationship with my mom. I love her with all my heart. This is gonna sound cheesy as hell, but I do consider her one of my best friends. And when we were talking about next steps, and that back then I didn't even know. I think I didn't even know if I was going to try to apply to this visa in the UK, or if I was just going to leave. At some point I was like, you know what? I would be more than happy just like going back to full-time horse riding, or like having a soft and easy job wherever, just so that I can make an income, and like that's that. And her immediate reaction was like, but why are you going to waste your PhD in doing that? And that's definitely something that I know I carry with me, not just because my mom said it. I think it's a thing that I've internalized from having spent too many years in academia and working for this PhD. And then that leads me to friends and colleagues who I've been talking a lot of these days, especially as I've been updating everyone on having exited academia and next steps and what my plan is. And I think for many of them, the obvious thing to do is to go out and find the next academic job. And if you can't find a full-time academic position, then maybe go into a postdoc or get a fellowship somewhere. Or maybe some of them, especially among the art historians, find a job as a curator in a museum or some sort of institution, which, I love curatorial work. I actually started my PhD thinking that it's what I needed to finally become a full-time curator, which hasn't yet happened. I'm also not looking for that full-time job at this very moment. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are also many external impositions. And again, no shade to my friends, my colleagues. But one of the things that has happened is that, first of all, they are surprised when I tell them that I'm not looking for a full-time job in a university or a museum. The other thing that has happened is that even after I say that, and I know they mean it with love, even after I say that, many of them are like, oh, but there's this fellowship application process open. You should apply. or there's this thing there in this university that you should apply to, or have you reached out to so and so in this university, they might be looking for lecturers or whatever. And what that has shown me is that unless you're a very particular type of public historian, I think most historians just don't conceive a professional life outside the traditional academia museum employment. And I think that's what makes it so scary for me, because I feel that I am, and I know I'm not, but like I feel I am reinventing the wheel here. And that is scary. But then also, I never dreamed about being a full time academic. This is something that kind of fell my way, or a dream I sort of adopted as part of the PhD status quo. I do not want to be constantly overworked and tired and rushing to get things published just for the sake of it, and have little opportunities for promotion and expansion and engaging with the real world, which is how I think a lot of academia happens. Not all of it, but a lot of it does. And so that's why I have decided to, for now at least, move away from it. And so that brings me back, after a very long tangent, I'm sorry, to my very own purpose, or my very own role as a fashion historian, but also what I think fashion history and fashion historians, fashion researchers can contribute more broadly to the fashion industry and perhaps also the world. And this has been a difficult thing for me to understand, really, I must say. It sounds like I have it all clearly laid out, but I don't. And maybe that's why it's scary too, and maybe that's why I was tearing up a couple minutes ago. It's just not as easy to envision what we do, or what we can do. But there are several like shimmers of light that I can see here and there. One of them I actually owe to one of my best mentors at DMU, even though the exit was rough and I was really very, very stressed through the redundancy financial restructuring process, which took, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months to resolve. That was difficult. But then I also met some amazing people, amazing mentors. And one of them is a historian. His research focuses mostly on political history, but one of the things that he has been doing for years is working with institutions, governmental institutions, but also NGOs and people in positions of power to influence public policy through history. And since we met, really, and from one of our very early conversations, I was telling him about my research in terms of diversity, of inclusion, especially of the work that I have had the privilege and honor to do with Indigenous designers, especially in Latin America and Indigenous communities. And he was like, I feel that your voice could be very, very, very helpful for a different set of public policies. And he kind of sparked that on me. And so that's definitely something that makes history very relevant and very important. And it becomes a tool for, yes, designing public policy at the governmental level, but it can also inform the ways in which different industries function, in which, economic systems function, in which societies can be structured, even how education as a bigger institution can be shaped too. So, not thinking about what an individual scholar or lecturer or professor can teach in their own class spaces, but how can universities as institutions implement certain measures to ensure global, a more diverse, and inclusive in many ways. And I'm not just talking about racial inclusion, but inclusion of different types in terms of accessibility, like physical accessibility, accessibility for neurodivergent students, people with different language abilities, things like that. I think that's one of the things that historians are really good at doing, actually, much more than many other people, because we have that sensibility and that learning of how things have worked or not worked in the past. And in a way, that capacity of questioning it all, trying to read in between the lines, see beneath the surface, and yeah, extract information that can be useful also in different ways. And so I think this is the clearest aspect or the clearest potential effect or application that history can have. I'm pretty sure I'm not the first one to talk about this. At a more specific level, this broad implication of history can be brought into the fashion industry and perhaps art practice in general, because it can also help us understand the true diversity of the world, but then also certain dynamics and certain ideas that can lead to, for example, avoiding cultural appropriation, which unfortunately is still very much a problem. And yes, everyone is tired of talking about cultural appropriation. Trust me, I am too. But it still keeps happening. So we have to keep talking about it. But what if we actually took a step back and found ways to actually avoid it? And I think the only way of doing it is by integrating historical knowledge into the creation of fashion at every single level. And again, that's something that I think needs more thorough research than what many brands and designers do, either because they're not trained to do it or because they don't have the capacity to do it, and because it's not sort of internalized in the industry. So that's where historians become important. And then there's also, I think, a lot to say about those histories that are not the ones that everyone knows, that can inform collections and design practice beyond the same sources of inspiration that everyone kind of repeats over and over and over again, to a point that those recycled ideas are not even exciting anymore. And actually, this just made me realize another conversation that I had last night at the Fashion Minority Report event with one of the students there. And it's that I think I get much more excited when I see my research inform a collection. And actually, I have this beautiful skirt, a pollera, that's the result of a research project that I did with a brand in Colombia ages ago. And they produced this type of skirt. They call it a pollera. It kind of resembles the structure of a pollera, that are basically full gathered skirts that have their history in early modern Spanish under petticoats, and that eventually became part of the national regional costumes of several South American countries and Panama, and that has been reclaimed by especially Quechua and Aymara indigenous women as, one of their garments, even though it's a garment of Spanish origin, but it denotes indigenous identity, indigenous women's identity very strongly in the Andes. And by the way, I tell the story of this garment in my advent calendar currently going on Instagram. So I'll link it to the episode description. But what I'm trying to say here is that I did a research project for this brand, then gave them basically, or developed with them, a concept for a capsule collection that they were working on. It was kind of bringing together Andean worldviews with Islamic worldviews, designed specifically for a retailer in the UAE. And from there, this other project evolved. And so they created these polleras, which take roughly the structure of the actual pollera, but the polleras are also made using I think, hemp silk as a fabric and then dyed with coca leaves. And so one of the things that's happening there is this reclamation of two of the plants that have been terribly misused in Colombia and that have basically fueled illegal drug trade, and just reinterpreting them, and not just the plants but the labor around them, and offering opportunities to people who grow both plants to leave that sort of violent cycle of drug trafficking and drug production. And if this could be taken to scale, I think that would definitely reframe a lot of the agricultural production in the country. But at a more personal level, what I was saying before is that seeing that skirt and actually getting to wear that skirt, because that's what I wore to defend my PhD thesis very appropriately and on theme, because this is one of the garments, the sort of case studies that I use in my thesis and that will be featured in my upcoming book. That felt so much better than writing the book. I haven't published the book, but just seeing and wearing that skirt was so much more meaningful to me than even defending the PhD. And I think that in itself tells a lot about the potential of history to inform real fashion practices, real world fashion practices, and public policy, economic structures or economic policies, things like that. What I struggle to see though is at the micro level how we can use history to design our own ways of engaging with fashion. And as I was brainstorming for this episode yesterday, I started to think about my own work as a fashion stylist, which it's funny because I got trained in one of these traditional fashion styling programs. I don't know, like 10, 12 years ago. I think I had just moved to New York. So I had just made that big leap from economic history and public policy to fashion. And I think I was trying to figure out if I really wanted to be a fashion historian or maybe get involved in the fashion industry. And I think that's when I did the training to become a stylist. And then I never really applied it until this year. And so, I like to do a sort of end of year review. And last year was the year I became a fashion educator. I have been thinking about it, and I think this year is the year I became a stylist. I have had a few really style coaching clients, but I developed my entire program this year, and that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to do more next year. First and foremost, because I love it, and second, because I think that has opened my eyes to how we can learn from history at a more personal level and how to get people excited about history, really. And this has resulted from conversations with clients, of course, but then also with friends and even the most unexpected friends. I have a really good friend of mine. We grew up together. I have never really thought of him as a fashionista. And I can't remember what we were talking about the other day. And he was like, well, yes, because we all care about fashion much more than we think. And if I had known this or this or this before, I would have done this. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what? I was very proud that he was paying attention to everything I say on social media. But also, I was surprised. So that takes me to the impact or the learnings that we can take from fashion history at the individual level. So there are several individual anecdotes that we can see in history that we can understand from different lenses, different ways. So there's, of course, a psychological element to it, for example, where people have used fashion to feel a certain way or to achieve a certain sort of persona that they can then embody and take to certain moments of their lives. And then that can help them reach certain things. But then there are also anecdotes about subversion and resistance that I think are very, very, very important, and that we can also kind of personify in our own ways, especially when we are struggling to go against the current. And I'm definitely one of those people struggling to keep going, keep rowing against the current these days, as I've already mentioned. And then there are many lessons to be learned as well about fashioning our own identity, about living in accordance to our values, about dreaming and creating really different ways to produce and sell and consume and engage with fashion. And they can shape macroeconomics, public policy, the big things in society. But I think they can also shape our very own, very personal, very micro experiences of life. And I'm not really sure how this is going to take shape, but I am definitely excited with the prospect of being able to talk more about this with more people. So you will definitely hear more of that in this podcast. You will definitely see it as I continue to grow as a style coach or as a stylist. And if you are interested in maybe exploring how to dress yourself more in accordance to your values and your lifestyle and your identity, please reach out. I have slots open for individual coaching in January. And depending on interest, I might also offer a second group version of my style coaching program. So definitely do reach out. And as the end of year special in a couple weeks, I will be talking about dressing for your values in the new year. So if that's something that interests you, remember to tune back. And so with this, I will end for today. So to close, I, as always, want to leave us with three little things. And the three little things today are, of course, about fashion history. What's the point of fashion history, or how can fashion history influence real life, so to speak? And my three little things are that first, we can learn from history strategies of resistance, of self fashioning, of owning our identity, owning our purpose, owning what we truly believe in life, and dress for it and use it to present ourselves in the world, but then perhaps also use it to change the world. The second one is more closely related to this changing the world, and is that from fashion history, we can understand or get closer to the root of certain forms of inequality, of discrimination, power imbalances, and then use fashion history to develop public policy. And then finally, I think fashion history, and especially a deep, slow, thorough engagement with fully researched fashion history that goes beneath the surface, helps us create better for fashion, create better things, more complex things, more complex ideas, rather than just recycle the superficial things that are not really interesting at all. And in doing so, it also helps us avoid malpractices like cultural appropriation, like discrimination, like labor exploitation or intellectual exploitation in the industry, which are all things that we're all tired to talk about. But unless they stop, we can't stop talking about them either. So those are my three little things today. Thank you again for listening. Please leave a comment, like, share, follow, and tune back in a couple of weeks. Bye bye.